Good morning, pre-calc. So today we're going to look at finding quadrants, and our learning target is you'll be able to use some partial trig information in order to identify the quadrant, even if we don't have enough information to fully identify what angle might be referred to, was to be able to identify the quadrant. So check the notes in our Canvas page where you find the unit circle right here. You open this unit circle. It's the same unit circle you've seen and grown to love in the past. Scroll down to page 2, and there is what I'm about to explain to you so you can follow along at home. So all students take calculus. This is a mnemonic device. It's an acronym. Um, may or may not actually be true about all students taking calculus, but it works for our purposes here. So here's a graph. We've got an x-axis and a y-axis. I've got a blue arrow on here indicating the standard center position, where we measure direction angle starting from the positive side of the x-axis going counterclockwise. So the graphs have quadrants. I'm sure you know that. Quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, starting from the positive side of the x-axis going around counterclockwise. The first quadrant we come to is quadrant 1. That is the upper right-hand corner, where if we're thinking about coordinates, positive x, positive y. Okay, in this quadrant, all trigonometric functions are positive. And so if we think about the acronym, all students take calculus, the A in all also stands for all in relation to the trig functions. All trig functions are positive. Every single one of them, all six, sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant, everything's positive in quadrant 1. Okay, continuing around counterclockwise, the next quadrant we come to is the S in our acronym, all students, and that S stands for, in our acronym, stands for sine. Sine is positive. This is quadrant 2. Sine is positive. All right, sine, we remember, refers to the y coordinate. And in quadrant 2 on a graph, you can have negative x, but positive y coordinates because we've still gone up from the x-axis. Sine will be positive. Okay, the acronym all students take calculus only refers to those first three trig ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent. So the S, students, transfers to the S for sine, but we know that if sine is positive, so is its reciprocal, cosecant. And so that's not included in the acronym, but we know that cosecant and sine will always have the same um, sign, positive or negative. So sine and cosecant, I've highlighted them both in green. Those will be positive in quadrant 2. All four of the other trig ratios are going to be negative: cosine, secant, tangent, cotangent. You really need to memorize the negative ones? Probably not. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but if you know which ones are positive, then process of elimination, right? Okay, continuing our journey around, we got quadrant 3 is the lower left in our acronym. That is take. All students take calculus. That T in take translates to tangent in our trig ratios. So tangent is the positive trig ratio in quadrant 3, along with its reciprocal, cotangent. Tangent and cotangent are positive in quadrant 3. All of the other trig ratios would be negative for any angle in quadrant 3. Sine, cosecant, cosine, secant. Okay, continuing around to the fourth quadrant, the lower right-hand side in our acronym, that's the C. All students take calculus. The C for calculus translates to cosine on our trig ratios. Cosine is positive in this quadrant, along with its reciprocal, cosecant. The other trig ratios are going to be negative. Okay, so cosine, as you remember, refers to the x coordinate. If we're thinking about the points on the unit circle, and since this quadrant 4 is on the positive side of the x-axis, cosine is going to be positive. All right, so all students take calculus, this acronym that reminds us which of the trig ratios are positive in these 4 different quadrants. All of them in quadrant 1, sine and cosecant in quadrant 2, tangent and cotangent in quadrant 3, cosine and secant in quadrant 4. All right, now we can jump into a do now, which is kind of like a do later, but whatever, we'll do it at this point. So see if you can identify which of the 4 quadrants would we find a point that has sine as a positive value, tangent would be a negative value, and secondly, what other quadrant would you find secant is positive and also sine is positive. Go ahead and hit pause. I'll wait for you. Figure that out. Hey, welcome back. So in the first case, sine is positive. That's going to be quadrant 2. S for sine, that's positive. And in the second question, secant and sine both positive. It's only going to happen in quadrant 1 where all 6 trig ratios are positive. Let's try another one. It's a different question. So for the angle indicated in this illustration, I got a graph, a unit circle. There's a vector showing an angle I've called t. Would each of these 6 trig ratios be positive or negative at that point, at point t? So sine of t, cosine of t, tangent of t, secant of t, cosecant of t, then secant of t, and cotangent of t. All right, so go ahead, hit pause, take a minute, see if you can figure out your answers for those 6 questions. I'll wait. All right, well, hey, so different ways of answering this question, but we're in quadrant 4. I mean, different ways to think about it. We're going to get the same answers. So we're in quadrant 4. I don't know why quadrants are always used Roman numerals, but they do. So quadrant 4. And in quadrant 4, all students take calculus, right? Calculus stands for cosine. The reciprocal of cosine is secant. These two are going to be positive. Those are the only ones that will be positive in quadrant 4. Everything else is going to be negative. So I would just fill in cosine is positive, secant is positive. All the rest are going to be negative. And of course, you could come to the same answers using a different thought process. So let's take a look at a couple of the problems in the assignment for today. Question number 1. Sine of x is negative 0.86. Cosine of x equals 0.52. So let me just tell you right up front, it's a trick question, but not the way trick questions normally are trick questions. The numbers in this problem are irrelevant. Okay, the only thing we need to pay attention to here are the sign. Is it a positive or negative value that is it's evaluated sine and cosine for us? We don't actually care about the value. We're not going to work backwards to find angles or something like that. Only thing we care about is it tells us sine is a negative number. Cosine is a positive number. All right, and we just got to figure out what quadrant it is. So if cosine is positive and sine is not, then our only option is going to be quadrant 4, the calculus quadrant. All students take calculus, C for calculus, C for cosine. Cosine is positive in quadrant 4. So we're going to pick quadrant 4. Okay, the numbers that are given as the valuation of the trig ratios do not matter. Pay them no attention. Question 5 is the other one we want to take a look at. And for the information given, find the quadrant in which the terminal point determined by t lies. So t is the angle instead of theta. It's just written as a t this time. The terminal point means where we end, right? So where on the unit circle, which quadrant is this point going to be in? And you're going to enter your answer as a Roman numeral, either 1, 2, 3, or 4 in Roman numerals, just like it shows here in the well-met problem. So for part A, sine is less than 0. We think about inequalities. If it's less than 0, it's going to be negative, right? We don't actually care what number it is. All we need to know is it's negative. Sine is negative. And cosine is less than 0. All right, well, that's also negative. So where are we going to find both sine and cosine negative? Well, it's not going to be the S quadrant where sine would be positive. It's not going to be the C quadrant where calculus would be positive. Obviously can't be the A quadrant where everything is positive because they're not. So it's going to have to be T, processes of elimination, or if you read through the list of negative trig ratios in the T quadrant, sine, cosecant, cosine, secant, all are negative there. And so this would be quadrant 3 using Roman numerals. I know it's weird, but quadrants, Roman numerals. All right.